The lawyer's voice cracked through the funeral home speakers, and my sister's hand froze halfway to my father's watch, still warm from being pried off his wrist an hour earlier at the viewing. "There is a codicil," the attorney said, "filed 3 months before Mr. Whitfield's passing, and it names an executor." Every head in that room turned toward me. "My name is Diane Whitfield. I'm 33 years old. And my family spent 3 decades deciding I was the disappointing one, the quiet one, the one who wouldn't amount to anything. They should have read the fine print before they started dividing up my father's life like it was theirs to divide." Welcome back to Cherry Revenge Tales. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from tonight. And if you believe in the kind of justice that doesn't shout, the kind that just waits, patient and quiet, until the moment is right, go ahead and like this video and subscribe before we get into it, because this one, I promise you, is worth the wait. 1 week before the funeral, we'd all gathered at my sister Renata's house for what she called a family dinner, though it felt more like an audition for grief. My father had been gone 4 days. Renata had already redone her kitchen island with the inheritance she assumed was coming, and she made sure everyone knew it over a roast she'd clearly had catered. "Dad always said the house should go to someone who'd actually take care of it," Renata announced, swirling her wine. "No offense, Diane, but you're renting a 1-bedroom. What are you going to do with a 4-bedroom colonial? Use it as storage for all your little art supplies." Mekretov Han, I taught high school art. It wasn't glamorous. It also wasn't a crime. My brother Marcus laughed into his glass. "She's right. Dad and I talked business all the time. He knew who understood money and who didn't. Marcus ran a car dealership that had gone bankrupt twice, both times bailed out by our father's signature on a loan." I said nothing. I never said much at those dinners. It was easier to let them talk themselves into a corner than to fight for airtime I didn't want. Then Renata's 14-year-old daughter, Presley, wandered in wearing my father's gold watch, the one he'd worn every single day of my childhood, the one he used to let me wind on Sunday mornings before church while he told me stories about his own father giving it to him. Renata had taken it off his body at the hospital before the funeral home even arrived. "Grandpa would have wanted Presley to have something special," Renata said, daring me with her eyes to object. "She's the only grandchild who ever really spent time with him." That wasn't true. I'd driven 40 minutes every Sunday for 6 years to sit with my father after my mother died, to manage his medications, to sit through chemo appointments Renata was always too busy to attend, and Marcus was always too broke to help pay for. But I didn't correct her. I just watched Presley twist the watchband around her wrist like a toy, and I felt something in me go very still and very cold. "You're awfully quiet," Marcus said, pointing his fork at me. "Cat got your tongue, or are you already planning how to lawyer up over a house you don't even want?" "I don't want to fight about this tonight," I said. It was the truth. I didn't need to fight. My father had already fought this battle for me, 3 months earlier, in a lawyer's office neither of them knew existed. The escalation came 2 days later, the morning of the funeral, in the parking lot of the funeral home. Renata cornered me by my car, Marcus flanking her like a bodyguard who didn't know his own client was already losing. "We need to talk about the house before the will reading gets weird," Renata said, arms crossed. Marcus and I agreed. "You take a cash buyout, we split the property, everybody's happy. You were never going to want to live there anyway." "That's not your decision to make," I said, keeping my voice level. "Don't be difficult, Diane, not today. Dad's dead, and you want to make this about you?" Her voice climbed half an octave. "You've always been like this, selfish. Dad used to say you had a hard time sharing even as a kid." That was a lie built on a lie. My father had never said that. But I'd learned a long time ago that correcting Renata mid-tantrum only fed the tantrum. "If you don't sign over your share voluntarily," Marcus added, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor, "we'll just handle it through the courts. You know how that looks, Diane. Family fighting over a dead man's house. You want that following you around at school? Parents talk." It was a threat wrapped in concern, the way theirs always were. I looked at both of them, at the watch still on Presley's wrist as she sat in the car with the window cracked, swinging her legs, bored by the argument about her own inheritance. "I hear you," I said, nothing more. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I turned my wrist slightly, felt the faint vibration of my smartwatch confirm the recording had started the moment Renata approached me, a habit I'd built quietly over the last 2 months since the day my father sat me down in his study and told me exactly what was coming. I'd learned by then that calm was the only language that made people like Renata reveal themselves completely. Whatever, Renata snapped, storming off toward the funeral home entrance. You'll come around, you always do. I almost smiled. Almost. What none of them knew, what I hadn't told a single soul, was that 3 months before he passed, my father called me into his study on a rainy Tuesday and handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a codicil to his will, notarized, witnessed, airtight. He'd watched Renata circle his assets for years like a vulture, waiting for the body to stop twitching. He'd watched Marcus borrow against a future that was never guaranteed to him, and he'd watched me show up, week after week, asking for nothing. They think quiet means weak, he told me, his hand trembling around his coffee cup. I used to think that too, when your mother was alive. She was quiet. She ran this family better than any of us ever gave her credit for. He tapped the envelope. Don't open this until the day you need it. And when you do, don't raise your voice. Let them raise theirs. I hadn't opened it. I'd simply carried it, folded into the lining of my bag, to every dinner, every guilt trip, every snide comment about my rented apartment and my modest salary. I let them build their case against me in real time, never knowing I already held the verdict. The will reading was scheduled for 2 o'clock, in the same conference room where my father had once taken me to open the envelope. Renata had invited half the extended family, apparently under the impression that a bigger audience would pressure me into folding. Aunts, cousins, a family friend who ran the local paper. Renata loved an audience. The attorney, a woman named Miss Okafor, unemotional and precise, opened with the standard will, the one everyone expected, the one Renata had already spent in her head. The house, split evenly, the savings, split evenly, sentimental items distributed at the family's discretion. Renata practically glowed. Marcus checked his phone, already texting someone about a real estate agent. Then Miss Okafor lifted a second, sealed document. There is a codicil, filed and notarized 3 months prior to Mr. Whitfield's death, superseding portions of the original will as they pertain to executorship, asset distribution, and specific bequests. Her voice didn't waver, didn't perform for the room the way everyone else in it had been performing for weeks. It names Diane Whitfield as sole executor of the estate, and it includes a written statement from the deceased regarding the reasoning for these changes. Renata's face went the color of old paper. That's not, there's some mistake, we would have known about this. Your father was under no obligation to disclose it to you, Miss Okafor said, flat as a countertop. He was, however, under obligation to ensure it reflected his verified, sound wishes, which we confirmed with 2 independent witnesses and a certified evaluation of his mental competency at the time of signing. I said nothing. I let the silence sit there, heavy, the way my father had taught me. Renata's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to argue with a wall. Miss Okafor continued, reading my father's statement aloud in his own words. Words I'd already memorized from the envelope I'd carried for 3 months. He wrote that he'd watched one daughter show up without being asked and expect nothing in return, and he'd watched a son and another daughter treat his generosity as a standing account to be drawn down whenever convenient. He wrote that the watch, the one currently sitting on a 14-year-old's wrist across the room, had been explicitly bequeathed to me, the only person he ever trusted to wind it gently on a Sunday morning without breaking the mechanism. Renata's hand shot toward Presley's wrist like she could physically hide the evidence. This is insane, Marcus said, standing so fast his chair scraped the floor. You manipulated him, you were alone with him for years, of course he'd write something like this. Anybody could see you coached him. There's a recorded assessment, Miss Okafor said, sliding a folder across the table. Conducted by an independent physician retained by the estate, confirming your father's full mental competency at the time of both the original will and this codicil. There's also, she added, glancing briefly, procedurally, in my direction, a recording submitted by Miss Whitfield documenting a conversation in the funeral home parking lot 2 days ago, in which both of you can be heard pressuring her to relinquish her share under duress and threatening legal escalation should she refuse. It's been noted for the file, should either of you attempt to contest the codicil formally. The room went dead silent. Renata turned to me, eyes wide, mouth working soundlessly, finally understanding what my quiet had actually been. You recorded us? She whispered, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. You told me I always come around, I said. I did. I came around to exactly what Dad wanted. Marcus's composure cracked first, the way it always did with people who'd built their whole identity on confidence they hadn't earned. This is because of the dealership loan, isn't it? You've been holding a grudge. I never said a word about the dealership, I replied, calm as still water. You just did. Renata rounded on him instantly. You never told me you still owed him money. How much, Marcus? How much did you take? And just like that, the two of them who had stood shoulder to shoulder against me in a parking lot 2 days earlier were suddenly tearing into each other, years of resentment and hidden debt spilling out across the conference table in front of aunts and cousins and a local newspaper editor who was, I noticed, taking careful mental notes. Renata's voice hit a register I'd never heard from her before, somewhere between fury and panic. You don't deserve any of this. You've never worked for anything real in your life, teaching finger painting to teenagers while the rest of us actually built something. I built 6 years of Sunday visits, I said quietly, and something in my tone finally cut through the noise, because for the first time in that room, everyone actually stopped to listen. I built every appointment I sat through when neither of you answered your phones. I didn't build it for a watch, Renata. Dad built it for me because he was paying attention the whole time you two weren't. Presley, still wearing the watch, looked between her mother and me with the wide, uncertain eyes of a kid who'd been handed something that was never really meant for her, used as a prop in an argument she didn't start. I felt for her, genuinely. She hadn't asked to be the family's latest bargaining chip. Miss Okafor closed the folder, unbothered by the chaos unraveling around her, and addressed the room the way you'd read a weather report. The codicil stands unless formally contested in court, which, given the recorded evidence and competency assessment, I'd advise against pursuing. The watch, along with the remainder of the specified bequests, will be transferred to the executor within 30 days. Renata sank into her chair like the air had gone out of her. Marcus stared at the table, his jaw working, the dealership debt now public knowledge among people who would absolutely bring it up at every future holiday for the rest of his life. I stood, walked around the table, and gently unclasped the watch from Presley's small wrist. She didn't resist. Your grandpa would have liked knowing you got to wear this for a little while, I told her, and I meant it. She wasn't the enemy, she never had been. Then I looked at Renata, who wouldn't meet my eyes anymore, and I said the only thing I needed to say. You told me I always come around eventually. Turns out, so does the truth. I didn't wait for a response. There wasn't going to be one worth hearing. Here's what I learned, sitting in that parking lot 2 days before the funeral, feeling my smartwatch quietly do its job while two people I loved tried to talk me out of what was rightfully mine. Your silence is not the same as your consent, and someone else's volume is not the same as their power. People will often mistake your composure for weakness, right up until the moment it isn't. You don't owe anyone a loud defense of your own worth. Keep your receipts, keep your evidence, keep your calm. And when the moment finally comes to show your hand, let the truth do the shouting for you. It's always louder than they expect. Thank you so much for watching this story here on Cherry Revenge Tales. If you haven't already, drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from tonight. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the next one.